Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and I just did lowering springs on a 2003 SVT Cobra that has the independent rear suspension, and I wanted to throw this video together to just kind of talk about the procedure a little bit, and I will include a link in the description to the full install video step by step so that you can do this. But there were a few things that I ran into along the way, and a few things that the owner of the car wanted to try, so we gave it a shot. And I'm going to talk about what the best procedure was, just kind of as an overview here. But you can choose to do it however way you want. There's several ways to install these rear springs, per se, is the main thing we're going to talk about. And so the Cobra IRS, or independent rear suspension, is basically one big frame. It's all kind of one piece. And I've circled the points where it mounts to the car. And so usually you're going to be going after those top mounts because they're right there in the wheel well, as I'll show you in a second. But if that does not work, you can go after the front mounts, which are lower. And so what I'm going to show you in the video is basically that some of the challenges you might run into is that the top mounts may have the bolt shaved down to fit a bigger wheel on. It's very common for people to shave that IRS bolt down to fit the 10.5-inch wheel. And so the bottom one is also a good option. It's a little harder to access, but once you get the bolt out, it also allows you to put the jack on the bottom of the subframe. So I'll show you here in this next picture. This is what it looks like if you do disconnect it from that top rear mount. You can see how it's dropping down there. And this was the problem that we had with our cars. See this bolt right here? That was ground down almost flat to where we couldn't even get a socket on there without worrying about it stripping. So with that, we decided to go into the front. And so you can see here, there is a place up here in the car. I already took that bolt out right there, but that's where it is, where the front of the subframe mounts. And it is accessible. You just have to have some extensions. It helps if you take the exhaust off. I did this without removing the exhaust, but you can punch that bolt all the way through once you loosen it, and see here's a good place to support the frame with the jack there. Something that we looked at, because this was ground down, just as something you might try doing, we looked at the other brackets here that mounts to it, and figured, well, maybe we'll take these ones out here, these 4 bolts. Once we looked into doing that, though, we found that IRS bolt, the one that's shaven down there, still goes into the frame, so there's really no way to get the bracket off. So that is not something that's going to work either. On the front of the car, you notice you can undo the knuckle here and push down and get the spring out quite easily. But in the rear, it's a different case. We went ahead and we undid the knuckle top and bottom just to give it a shot, even though I was pretty sure it wasn't going to work. And you have the end link here that goes to the sway bar. And to do that, you have to put a wrench on it first, and then behind it, locking, vice grips so that it doesn't spin as you loosen it up. But anyway, what you find out is no matter what you do, there's the control arm here. See this bar right here that's part of the subframe support? It gets in the way, so that control arm will not drop down like it did in the front. It will literally stop as soon as it hits that bar, so you can't just push it down like you do on the front. Now, one of the things that the owner brought over with the car were a few spring compressor tools, and this is kind of a joke here where it shows this guy in full armor, and he has a stick. It says, "Please don't kill me" at the top, and he's, going to barely touch the spring compressor tool, which illustrates the dangers involved in them. But they have 2 different kinds of spring compressors, basically, that they rent at the auto store, and neither of them will work, and this is why. If you look at this style here, the little silver pin at the bottom locks in on the bottom of the spring coil, and then the arched part above that is where the spring coil rests. And the springs on this car were actually too big where it would not fit inside that little groove. So you'd basically go to put the pin in, and it would just hit the coil. So that's why this style wouldn't work, and also you'd have to get them even on each side of the spring, and that just wasn't going to happen. There's not enough room. The other style spring compressor is one that goes up through the center of the coil, and then you put that little pickle fork on the right hand side under it, and it will compress the spring. And the reason why this one's not going to work is because if you look at the control arm, you can see the spring there at the top of the screen, and the control arm does have a hole in the bottom of it, so you can fit a compressor tool up through there and grab the spring. However, the tool that we had was too big to fit through the small hole in the bottom of the control arm. So that would be something else that you'd run into. If you want to research and find the correct spring compressor tool, you'd probably be able to come up with something, but with just basically what they rented over at O'Reilly's parts store that the owner brought with him, none of that would work, and that was why. So ultimately we went with dropping the IRS from the front mount, and it was the easiest thing ever, and that's the way that I would go. The only downside is a little hard to access the bolts, but really not a big deal. And I really like how you can support the jack on the front of the subframe right there. If you do the rear one, you have to put jacks under the control arms, as you see here. You have to support the differential, which is aluminum, and very worrisome that it'll crack the rear cover that's very thin. So you have to lower each of these wheels or struts, control arms one at a time, so it's a lot more difficult. Anyway, so if you're attempting an IRS spring swap, I hope this video is helpful. And like I said, I'm putting the links in the description to the full video series of how to do the front and rear springs for the independent rear Cobra. So that'd be the 99 through 04. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. And anyway, thanks for watching.